Welcome in, Hawks fans. Your boy Bryce Lewis back at it again for another Bleav in Hawks episode. Yes, sir. Been a second. We back, obviously, with more Hawks news that has happened in the last week or so. Giving my thoughts on how some of that news now impacts the team moving forward, as we are, like I've said, are in a very bit of a, as they call it, dead stretch of the NBA offseason. Obviously, the Olympics are going right now, so if you're paying attention to that, Team USA, Dyson Daniels on Australia, Bogey on Serbia, all them things. You obviously have that going on right now, but like I said, I'll go ahead and give you guys the latest on what I know about what's going on with the team right now, and obviously that just goes ahead and gets us to the first thing. Bruno Fernando earlier this week was waived by the team. The Hawks had pushed his deadline to potentially get a contract done with Bruno twice this offseason, and because another move was not made in relative regard to the roster, the decision was made to let Bruno walk and go find a new home. Obviously, this was something that was very evident that could happen if they did not make another move. In the DeJounte move, they did acquire Cody Zeller, who has a guaranteed contract. So regardless if they move Cody Zeller or not, they would have to pay him that money. So Bruno was an unguaranteed contract. So in terms of a money reasoning, it made more sense in that situation to move off of Bruno just because of that. Unless, again, a move was able to be made, whether that would be a Clint Capella move or etc. Obviously, some Hawks fans, I remember when that happened, some of the reaction on Twitter was not always the best. Some people were sad that Bruno left. I think I always said that Bruno, from what he was here his rookie year in the first couple of years into this past year, he has become a better big man. He is a guy who could be a backup big in this league. And I think that he's a guy who maybe continues to grow wherever he goes next. So a guy who, he had to step up big for the Atlanta Hawks last year when they had issues to injuries to Okongwu. And now he had to become that backup center to Clint Capella. And he had some good games. They also had some games where he struggled. I mean, that's just part of being a backup big in this league. You're not a starter for a reason, but doesn't mean you cannot provide value to the team, which he did at times. And I know some people within the fan base was up and down on Bruno Fernando, but at the same time, Bruno has done some good things for this team. Appreciate what he did for us coming back last year. And he was a part of that trade. I Bleav he was a part of that trade with Houston, I Bleav, for Garrison Matthews. And yeah, I think he was in that trade. So he came back because of that. And, like I said, he did what he had to do as the third center. Obviously, the Hawks now have kind of changed their center position a little bit now, adding Larry Nance, adding Cody Zeller. So that changes things, and that changed his outlook on this roster. But hope he catches on with a team. Hope everything goes well for him, and hope everything is still going to be solid for him as he moves forward in his NBA career. Now, like I mentioned, Cody Zeller is still here as a Hawk. I know some people were like, "Why?" Or Clint Capella, but I'll get into him a little bit later. People are wondering, would we keep Cody Zeller? Again, first thing I got to also say is first, he had a guaranteed contract. So obviously, guys like that, even if you cut Cody Zeller, you still owe him money. So it's not like you can cut him and then sign another guy and you're fine financially. No, you still owe him that money. Bruno is a guy you could let walk and it does not affect your cap at all. And you also have to think about the pecking order of the center position. Cody Zeller is probably the last center on that depth chart. He was not in the rotation and will not be in the rotation unless we have mass injuries to the center position. My perception of if everything stays the same will be either a Okongwu, Clint, then Nance, then Cody. So even if there's an injury to one of the first two, I would feel like Nance would be the backup center for Cody's the backup center. So, and listen, at the end of your bench, it's the end of your bench for a reason. You're not always going to have the best players at the end of your bench. There's going to be guys who have clear, glaring weaknesses, or you're like, what does he do? Every team has them, all right? So let's not overreact to every player at the end of our bench not being good, like that's supposed to be a shocker, all right? Cody Zeller, listen, as much as y'all say that, he did come in during the Miami Heat run a couple of years ago, and he had to play, and he did some things for them, and he was able to operate because he's a veteran. He knows his role. He knows how to play his game. And that's all you ask for when you ask a guy like him to play. is to do those things. And so you may not be a fan of Cody Zeller being on this team, but at the same time, unless there's injuries, I wouldn't expect to see Cody Zeller playing except outside of maybe some cleanup time, some garbage time, or like I said, mass injuries to that position. So I don't think there's that should be something we should be stuck on too much or worried about too much when it comes to the center spot after Bruno was let go. Now, obviously, I know also people are asking about Clint Capella. Okay, what does this mean for Clint? Is Clint guaranteed to be here? I know Brad Rowland has talked about, don't be shocked if they run it back with the guys. Like, don't be shocked if Clint is here. And I think as this offseason has gotten to this point, it seems more evident that may be the case. I know, again, that doesn't make a lot of people happy, but at the same time, I will say this for the Hawks in that situation. As much as people think Clint Capella is a bad center, he does bring a lot of valuable things, rebounding, rim protection, right? If you're the Hawks, you really can't move off Clint Capella unless you know you have someone who can step into that role, right? And they probably know, okay, we need size. So we can't just say or intentionally want to say, hey, let's move off Clint, but then not add a center with size, right? So in that situation, the Hawks are basically like, until we find a player or maybe a trade or somebody that we can acquire that would make move for that, will make sense for that move, Clint has a decent chance of staying on the roster because of that, even if that's not what you want to hear. Clint Capella is the guy who, like I said, he can still get you 10 rebounds a game. He's a guy who can still, like I said, good screener, good pick and roll guy. Can help at the rim. Obviously, I could sit here and make an argument for you. The Hawks being better at the point of attack will help make Clint Capella a better player for this team, especially defensively, just because now there's not a crap ton of pressure on him to have to defend because he knows there's no resistance from the point of attack on this defense now. But I think realistically, Hawks aren't going to move Clint unless they had another guy ready to go that they want in that spot. And for some people, maybe people think, okay, you start Kong, you start laying Nance. Again, size is kind of an issue still there. Even though Larry Nance has been a good center, especially a good small ball center in this league. Or if you wanted to keep Bruno, maybe putting him in that spot, in that position as well. So those are all different things that potentially you could have considered when going through the process of Clint, but maybe they weren't happy or excited about it. I know Brett Siegel from Clutch Sports had mentioned that Okongwu is expected to get a minutes increase. Now, whether that means he's going to start or not, we are not sure yet. I would think if you are going to give Okongwu more minutes, that he should start, just because, him and Clint kind of were splitting minutes last year, kind of almost even. Plus, there were games where Okongwu would play more than Clint. So it's like, if you're going to do that, does that mean that that's the stance they're going to take, which is him becoming a starter? We'll have to see, obviously, as we get closer to the season. But they also mentioned that, listen, the Hawks, he also mentioned in his report, the Hawks do like that 1-2 combo still. People have said it. You've heard it all the time. Hawks get 48 minutes of good center play. And so, again, I'm sure the Hawks realize that and say, okay, well, again, it's not like we're in this desperate need to get off Clint because we're bad there. We're good there. It's just if we can maybe find a better player who fits what Quinn in the system wants to do, but still provide some rim protection, things like that, then yeah, sure, we should definitely look into making that move. But if not, he's a guy who could stick around. And remember, this is his last year of his deal. This isn't, could the Hawks extend him? I know that's worst case scenario for some people, but it's a possibility. But like I said, he could also be a very talked about name at the trade deadline. Because again, expiring contract, maybe a playoff team says, oh, we need some rim protection. We need a center who can rebound. Hey, Hawks, what about Clint Capella? So I think really from that perspective, there's different avenues the Hawks can go down in that situation. And we don't know which direction they're going to go right now. It's still up in the air. They still have decisions they have to make in regards to that position. But right now, it seems like they may stand pat at that center position. And they added someone else to the group. They also added on a 2-way deal They added Dominic Barlow from the San Antonio Spurs, who played with San Antonio last year, a guy who actually played in overtime elite with Alex Sarr. He actually came out a year before Sarr came out, which was this past year. So he's a guy who apparently, from what I've read, what I've seen, a lot of people like him. A guy who can protect the rim. They feel like he has a lot of decent potential in this league to maybe become a solid player in this game and become a really good rotation player. One thing to keep an eye on from the Atlanta Hawks is pretty much, I Bleav, everybody except Okongwu's contract is up at that center spot. So is that a foreshadowing to Barlow potentially becoming part of this rotation in a year? Again, he was a part of the Spurs rotation this past year. You could see highlights. You could see him playing. I think he had his best game against Dallas, I Bleav. I think he had like 22 and 19. I could be wrong. Somebody can fact check me. But, he showed some flashes. I mean, mainly his defense is the main thing. But he has showed the ability to kind of, also set a screen, roll to the brim, be someone who you can use in the pick and roll game. So, and listen, I remember when that move happened, looking at the comments, and some Spurs fans were disappointed that they lost him. So clearly he's a guy that, Spurs fans kind of valued a little bit. Obviously he's not a star for them, but a guy that you can, if you know ball, you can watch him and say, hey, he can play a little bit. He's a guy who definitely has potential to be a really solid player in this league. And so the Hawks were able to get him on the two-way, and that was their last two-way deal. So that now obviously puts him in position. Obviously, two-way guy. He'll probably be in their G League system. Or again, if injuries happen, maybe someone that you call up to the obviously main roster and kind of let him see if he ever gets minutes and maybe some cleanup time and things of that nature. But it's something that I think Hawks could be thinking ahead of time. They could be thinking about the future. In terms of like, okay, well, we can insert him into the lineup. I remember one reporter was basically like, if he was a prospect at this year's draft, he would have been a top 30 guy in his opinion. So I Bleav that was San Vicenci. I could be saying his last name wrong. I apologize. But that tells you that this is a guy who has some talent and people like. So the Hawks were able to get him on a two-way, and it'll be interesting to see what his career trajectory here in Atlanta is. Now, coming from that center discussion, going into the next question that comes from them signing Barlow is obviously their second-round pick, Nikola, who broke his foot in the summer league. What is his future? Obviously, the Hawks have always had the option of stashing him. That seems more likely now. Obviously, we won't know till it happens. But, he's a guy who I think showed some flashes before he got hurt. A guy who some people liked when they drafted him, when you watch more film on him. And so, what does that mean for him? Do the Hawks stash him? Is there a chance they let him walk and then now he's able to pick up with another team? I mean, obviously, with guys like him, he has the ability just to still go back overseas. He doesn't have to come over to the NBA if he doesn't want to. So, but like I said, the Hawks have his rights. So in that situation, like I said, stashing seems like potentially the move the Hawks go down just to have him, still play basketball, let him get healthy. But again, it just depends. Do the Hawks want him in Atlanta recovering here, or do they want him, back, like, listen, you can go back, play professional basketball overseas with your former team or whatever team, and we'll be cool with that, and we'll just send some guys over there. We'll check in with you, see how you're doing, and then, like I said, as the season goes on and going into next year, when we reevaluate this roster once again, we can look into, okay, where do we see with Nikola this year? So that's definitely something that, is a possibility for sure in the grand scheme of things. So I think overall, he's going to be someone I think at this point is the most interesting guy left that they have to make a decision on that's coming up. And so it will be interesting to see what that decision ends up being in the grand scheme for the Atlanta Hawks and where they see him fitting into the equation now that they've filled all of their two-way spots on the roster. Also, got to give the Dyson Daniels update. Dyson's been playing in the Olympics right now. I Bleav, actually, at the time of this recording, he actually played today against, was it Greece? Let me check. Was it Greece today? Yes, it was against Greece. He had 11-6 rebounds, 8 assists, 1 steal, shot 57% from the field, and 40% from three. So Dyson has still been playing well in the Olympics. Guys have been keeping up with him, watching him, just talking about his defensive backcourt pressure, ability to create turnovers, forcing 8-second violations, things like that. Shout out to Grant Shirley. And just still being active. I know last video I had talked about his impact and what we were seeing in the Expedition Games before the Olympics started for Dyson. A guy who a lot of Hawks fans are excited about and excited what he's going to bring to this team, especially being able to fix the point of attack defense. Obviously, I asked last time, who's going to start at the two? Is Dyson your guy? Is Bogey your guy? Et cetera, et cetera. It's a very interesting question that we'll have to see what the Hawks decide to do at that spot as time moves on. But he continues to play well. Obviously, we have to think this is also FIFA rules. I know some people have given some pushback to the Dyson Daniels excitement and mentioned, like, listen, he's doing this against, not every team has all these NBA players, and also, this is FIFA rules. This is not NBA rules. Maybe his game is good in the FIFA game, but we don't know if his game is good in the NBA game. Some guys are still like, he's not ready to start. Everybody has their opinion on what they think Dyson is or isn't, right? And so I think that contributes to just, first, obviously everybody has their opinion. And second, I think the big thing too is this is also a very unique situation for guys, for fans, because you're able to see a guy that you picked up play before they even play for your team. Now, obviously, you ask yourself, could that potentially lead to some wear and tear for Dyson? He's really young. You're like, that's not too big of a deal. But, I think biggest thing you really want to see is just you want whatever you're seeing. If you've been watching the Olympics and you've been watching Australia's games, you want to see is what you're seeing on the court there going to translate to here in Atlanta. And he's going to bring that same energy, that same enthusiasm, the ability to defend, the ability to shoot. He's shot well, even though he hasn't shot a high volume amount of threes, which I've talked about before with Dyson. He doesn't shoot a high volume amount of shots. Plus, he's a guy who understands his role. He's a guy who, if you give him a role, he will play his role to the best of his ability. Role clarity is extremely important for any professional team, because sometimes that can kind of muddy into other people's roles, and then everybody's kind of confused. Okay, what do I need to do to make this team go from my perspective and things like that? It'll be interesting to see what the role that Quinn gives Dyson. I don't know how much communication they've had with him playing basically the whole time since he's been traded. So I don't know how much the Hawks have even talked to Dyson Daniels. I'm sure they've had some contact, at least with his agent for sure. But I don't know how much they've actually talked to him. Because right after the Olympics, you're talking in about, we're in August now, so maybe a month. You're talking, we're about to get to training camp. And so he'll have to, whenever Australia's season ends, which I think they're on the verge of being eliminated potentially. I think they lost to Greece today. He'll get maybe like a month off, and then, month and a half, and then, get ready for camp. So, at least he's been able to work, and I'm sure, still been working on his game even while in the Olympics right now, as he continues to develop and continues to do his thing moving forward. So, like I said, excited for Dyson. I know some people are trying to hold your horses. Listen, at the end of the day, I'm excited for the defense he's going to bring. We know offense is the question, and we will continue to see what that is going to actually turn into, and we'll see how Trey works with him, because I think a lot of people are excited for the Trey Young, Dyson Daniels backcourt, and seeing how those two play off of each other, and if the fit is really, really good. Because one thing I've said about this entire team in general is that I feel like the Hawks, just as a team throughout, just fit better than they did last year, But, all right, so now I have this question to you guys watching, listening. One question I think I feel like is a good discussion to have is, I talked about my last episode, the two, who's going to start at the two. Now my question is, who should be the backup for the Atlanta Hawks? I feel like a lot of people throughout this offseason, they pretty much said Muhammad Gay. for the most part, backup 4. But I know coming out of Summer League, some people have wondered, is Mouhamed Gay ready? Because you still saw some things that were like, plays a little out of control at times, things like that. Is he ready to be the backup 4? Other guys at that potential position, I've always said Larry Nance, since he technically can play 4 as well, is a potential option. Especially with Clint and Okongwu stay, I would think Larry Nance has a great chance of being the backup 4. And then also I brought up Vic Krejci. He's a guy who can play 1 through 4. He's just a skinnier dude. So still 6'8", but skinny. And then obviously Mouhamed Gay. When Jalen Johnson comes out the game, who will be the backup 4 who comes in for him? I want to know your guys' thoughts down below on who you think may be ideal for that backup 4 behind Jalen Johnson. Now, if I go into each person, Mouhamed Gay obviously is the guy with the highest upside. He's the guy who, from the flashes we've seen, he could have he can hit some threes, he can stretch the floor, athletic, rebound, can block shots. Obviously, his thing is he's still growing his body, obviously still skinnier on the skinnier side of things. And also just lack of basketball experience in general, still gaining knowledge of the game. And, like I said, can play out of control at times, which, the question you have to ask yourself, if you do think Mouhamed Gay should be the 4, is, are you okay going through those growing pains in the season, knowing there's going to be some games where he may not be playable because of how he's playing? Like I remember, if you remember that Chicago Bulls game, he played and he seemed out of control and never came back in the game. Quinn was like, "You're done." So, I don't know if they do that here. Obviously, you like to probably let him play through it. But that is something that you have to keep under consideration. But you also see the upside. You see the potential he brings to the table. You see the talent that he has. And so that's why I think a lot of people would be like, you're telling me we can have Jalen Johnson and then he can come out and then we're bringing in Mouhamed Gay, and that's not a break for a defender? Like, oh, Mouhamed can still attack the rim, stretch the floor, do different things that can make it tough. That's obviously something that, is on the table for Atlanta, and that could be a move they make. Obviously, he's the highest upside out of the 3 guys I mentioned. And then you go into, like I said, Larry Nance. Larry Nance is a guy who's he's 6'7", 6'8", so he's not even that tall, but could play the 4, He's been a good small ball 5. I know a lot of people have connected him to the center position. Guy who's worked on his game, a veteran, knows how to play. He has a lot of respect in this league. A lot of players respect Larry Nance. A lot of players think Larry Nance can play. I know in that trade, some people were like Larry Nance, but if you really look at Larry Nance, he's a guy who can still compete, do different things for you on both ends of the floor. Obviously, he's a veteran, so he's a guy you can trust, a guy that you have a lot of confidence in, just, that natural guy who maybe be a leader on the floor because he has so many years of experience. Obviously, you remember him for the Patrick meme that Bleacher Report released a few years ago, something that he'll never probably shake for his career. But a guy who, like I said, can operate, do different things for you. And like I said, a guy who's just smart, who's played this game a while, and never know, can give pointers to guys like Jalen, Mouhamed Gay, things like that, while also being here on the Atlanta Hawks. So, and remember, he's the guy who you heard still has the most trade value out of the guys that we may be thinking about moving from the front court. So, a guy who, I could see Quinn, if he wanted to go with something more steady, something more stable, going with Larry Nance at the 4 if they don't move Capella or Okongwu. That could be what they go with just to have stability on the floor. And then lastly, Vic Krejci. I mentioned this to a friend because technically Krejci can play 1 through 4, technically. And obviously he would probably be the best in terms of spacing. If you put him at the 4, he's basically a stretch 4. He will probably be roaming around the 3-point line. So in terms of spacing on the floor, it'll be really good. Obviously, another shooter who, if you have Trey on the floor, you can spread everybody out. He can find Krejci for threes. That would be the big advantage of having Krejci play in that position. Disadvantage is obviously, even though he's 6'8", he's a skinnier guy, just like Gay. So you play against bigger players, can probably get bullied a little bit, especially playing at the 4 spot instead of playing like 3 or 2. So again, is that something you're comfortable with? Is that something you're okay with? Like I said, every player has their plus and minuses. Like I said, Larry Nance has probably the lowest upside out of all 3 of the guys. Vic Krejci's kind of right there in the middle. he provides spacing and 3-point shooting. Another passer, another playmaker on the floor, and a guy who, like I said, with length and is active defensively, but at the same time is a smaller player. So you, again, playing against bigger players could be a disadvantage, and also may not be that great for rebounds as well and hurt you on the board. So these are all things that the Hawks have to consider when making a decision of who's going to be that 4 for them and who they think would be the best person for that spot to back up Jalen Johnson. It's another decision that, like I said, they have to make when going into the season, who they feel comfortable at with that spot and everything like that. So obviously, like I said, guys, give me your thoughts on who you think the backup 4 should be for the Atlanta Hawks. And maybe there's a name I haven't mentioned that you guys want to put in there. Definitely go ahead and do that too. So we'll have to see how that goes. But that's kind of what's been happening with the Hawks recently. We're probably about to wrap this up here right now, guys. Obviously, it's your boy Bryce Lewis. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Brycey_2K for all of my Hawks takes. If you're listening to on YouTube, subscribe to the channel, like the video. If you're listening to audio, leave a rating, leave a review, leave a comment, and to show love to the pod. Appreciate you guys tuning in, obviously, for another Bleav in Hawks episode. And like I said, it's your boy Bryce Lewis. We'll see you next time.